Hey, Tyler, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Pam. How are you?
Good. I'd like to welcome you and our audience to Ag Market IQ in depth. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what in the world's going on with this corn market. Tyler, you just got a chance to meet with some of your customers and some of your fellow strategists. Um, what's our thinking here on what's happening in the corn market?
Yeah, we had the opportunity to meet as a company in the Ozarks over the last week. We had a customer event on Thursday night where we had some farmers come in. Brian Burke with John Stewart and Associates, and Matt Bennett, one of the co-founders of Ag Market, were able to speak. And then we had a lot of time together as brokers and co-workers, kind of discuss strategy. And the thing we've been finding is it's been a really tough year, both as a commodity broker as well as a producer, to be an effective marketer. We've set a lot of highs in the market, or what turned out to be highs, in times when we typically wouldn't see it. A lot of people probably weren't prepared to be making large scale sales of their new crop back in February, which is when we posted those highs. We got close to hitting some of our targets there in April. We thought we'd hold on tight because it was April. Typically, we're going to get a late May, June, early July weather scare that really pops this market higher. And so far in 2025, we've just not seen any type of a weather scare. Really good weather in the major corn and soybean producing areas of the country, and it's just really kept a lid on prices as we move forward.
And we've got a lot of farmers listening to this who are thinking, we've had terrible weather. We've had flooding in places. We've got some scattered drought. Um, is there just not enough that's causing the problem? And, on the one hand, from the market view, you want something like that to pull it up. On the other hand, you don't want to be that farmer hit with the weather problem. So, why aren't we seeing weather cause these issues?
You're exactly right, and no producer or individual ever wants to hear that weather's been great when they look out their window and in their neck of the woods it has been
Yeah.
anything but great, and that does always stink. The crux of the problem, I think the best way I can describe it is, uh, I'm in Western North Dakota, and my wife and I drove all the way to the Ozarks, um, and from Bismarck, North Dakota to Brookings, South Dakota, it would be one of those corn crops that's a little bit below average, subpar. We're behind. We haven't had enough heat. And I wouldn't tell you that the crop looks outstanding in North Dakota or the northern half, or even 2/3 of South Dakota. But as soon as we got Sioux Falls and crossed the I-90 line, I don't know that I could tell you that I saw a poor looking stand of corn from I-90 all the way to Wichita, Kansas. And that would be fairly not normal. That long of a stretch where you've got just a really, really good looking crop. A lot of it was tasseling. That was on July 4th or shortly after July 4th. Most of those areas have continued to see beneficial rainfall over the last week. And for the most part, we haven't seen those scorching temperatures, and we've cooled off a little bit in the evenings. Now, again, there's going to be areas that don't see that maybe missed out on those rains, and that does stink for those producers. But as a whole, you've just seen a, as good a growing season for a very large portion of the corn belt as we've seen in the past few years, and couple that with 95 plus million acres of corn that went in the ground, and the market's just looking for a very large supply to come off the combines as we roll into fall.
Yeah. So, how are you guys feeling? I know agmarket.net keeps your ear to the ground pretty good. How are you guys feeling about those estimates, those yield averages coming out of USDA?
The USDA is going to kind of follow their path. They came in with a 181 yield on their July report, WASD report. We did not feel that they would deviate from that. That's kind of their uh, that's just the method they follow, is they're going to stick with trend line yield. Now, once we get into August, they're going to start utilizing some different satellite imagery, some survey data to start making adjustments to yield. A lot of your private analysts are well above 181. I'm not even going to get into specifics because I know that it sets off a lot
Right.
of fireworks when people do try to say what the yield models
Yeah.
are suggesting. Right now,
Mhm.
most of those yield models are above where the USDA is. I would not be surprised, barring any significant change in weather, that we don't see a uptick on WASDE reports as we move into the August WASDE and then September. Again, that's barring the weather remains as is. That can always change, and that's why we monitor forecasts multiple times a day.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking what I'm hearing here is chances of holding out for a higher price are kind of slim. And so maybe what folks need to be doing is looking at how they can protect themselves from a lower low, and yet keep their upside open so they can take an opportunity if it comes along.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would say is ag market. We too feel like maybe we've missed the boat a little bit. We feel behind. Like I said, there's been a lot of anguish in farmer country over just how difficult this has been to market this year's crop. What we're looking at now for the producer that maybe didn't sell when we put in some of those highs, or we got back to some of those levels that might have been acceptable, is we're looking at the crop that we know has got to get moved at harvest. No matter how you slice it, there's a big crop that's going to have to go to town. Probably not going to have enough storage on farm to hold it all. So, what we're looking at now is how do we manage those bushels? What do we do if, and again, this is always an if because we don't know.
Yeah.
The Mother Nature can change over the next several months. But if the weather stays good, and we do see, a trend line plus yield number come to fruition on top of 95 million acres, that's a lot of corn that's got to get
Mhm.
gone or got to get moved somewhere, and it's got to get moved in a hurry. And you will likely see a much lower December corn futures board at that time. So, since we've got a little reprieve off the lows here yesterday, and then a little bit of one today, we're up slightly right now as we speak. We're looking at how do we protect to where we're at now to try to protect, maybe last year's lows. If you recall, last year, your December 2024 crop contract got down to like that 380,
Yeah.
385 level. So how do we protect the 40 cents here to that 380 level? There's some strategies out there that you can utilize that kind of cheapen the cost up using some options. But as you said, still leaves the upside open, still allows us to price it, or if we hit some of those targets that we've already set, because there is some type of a weather issue, because there's some type of demand story that comes to fruition.
Mhm.
That's kind of the goal right now, is how do we protect how much further this thing could go lower, although we don't want it to. There are tools out there to put some type of a floor in place for a little bit.
And it feels like we've got more threats for lower prices than we do um, optimism for higher prices. We're looking at Brazil having a large crop. Maybe their domestic use will help on that. Maybe it won't. And then we were talking earlier, Mexican screwworm, old world screwworm, and Mexico. That's a mouthful. Um, and then, will they use enough corn to make a difference? And we know that's one of the lower price products.
Yeah, I mean, those are all wild cards. It's stuff that
Yeah.
could happen. That's one of the concerns is what happens with energy prices, and
Hmm.
does ethanol demand stay strong? Which for the most part it has been. Our export demand has been strong. The problem the
Hmm.
market has, and you kind of alluded to it. It was a big crop in Brazil. Feels like it's only getting larger by the day that they harvest. Um, and some of our, while our exports have been good, some of the trade policies maybe limiting export upside potential as we move
Hmm.
forward. And so the what we need is some type of new demand to come forward. I don't know, those usually take quite a bit of time to develop. So that's not a straw that I'm grasping at, or we need the weather to change and maybe not get such a large crop as we move forward. And again, as of right now, could that happen? Yes, it could always happen. Just
Sure.
if we continue to get the weather we've been getting, and we don't see any of those major impacts, I think the producer has to be prepared to see even lower prices than where we are right now, and that's I don't love that. I would rather come on here and tell you that they're going much, much higher, but I just don't think I'd be doing anyone any justice if I did so.
Yeah. So sounds like the message here is get what you can while you can. And if another opportunity comes for a higher price, leave yourself open for that.
Yeah, we like to remain flexible at these levels. You know, the time to make straight sales and limit the upside, I think has passed. You do want to leave yourself some flexibility in case this market does move higher. Like I mentioned earlier, we're staring at uh, below cost of production prices for most of the corn belt. Doesn't seem to matter where you go and run the numbers. It's really tough to make a cash sale at these levels right now and see that number pencil out. So now, if you're in one of those areas where you do, you know, say you've got a 230 bushel APH and you do happen to grow a 260 bushel corn crop, those 30 extra bushels are going to change the economics on that quite drastically. And so those are the kinds of things a producer needs to be looking at. Be realistic, and you know, maybe there isn't anyone out there that's in that boat, but those are the types of things that only the producer knows. The producer knows their cost of production. They know what their APH is. They know what their yield potential of their crop is right at the moment. And so those are things to be looking at. And if you're in one of those areas where that's the case, you know, maybe now you can be making some sales or putting some floors in that might not stick a ton of money in your pocket. It might not be like 21, 22, but it sure beats seeing these prices erode even further because you do have one of those monster crops, and we do produce a very large national yield on the corn crop.
Sure. So I'm a huge baseball fan. So what I'm hearing is play Moneyball. We might
Yeah,
not get the home run, but get on base.
yeah, and I'm afraid. You know, when I take a step back and look at the long run, we've been talking with our customers, kind of having this conversation over the last few months. Is really that's probably the goal is to play Moneyball. You know, you come off one of those years where we had in 21, 22, where price just seemed to go up every single day, and we were staring at $6, $7 corn. It really made guys scared to go and sell $5 corn over the last few years because there's that fear that we might miss out on that last dollar or $2, which is a very large difference when you're talking volume like we were. It does feel like we're entering one of those market environments for the next few years, anyhow, where that, you know, 470, 480, $5 mark is going to be the top end of it. And then in this $4 range, it's going to be on the lower end. I'm not saying it can't go higher. I don't want to be misconstrued that it can't go lower. But we do feel like when we get into those, you know, the 450 and above, a producer needs to be looking at making sales and rewarding that market, and avoiding the pinch where they're forced into selling at harvest time when the market's much lower.
Sure, sure. They, you know, for as long as I've been doing this, and um, you're a young fella, so I won't tell you how long I've been doing this, and I'm not as good at it as you. I've just been writing about it. But you know, the message seems to have always been, you know, it's not as important to hit the peaks as it is to avoid the lows.
Yeah, that's a very true, and unfortunately, it does feel like a lot of folks are focused on hitting the peaks and end up taking a swing when we're at the lows because of that. And so it's very important to remember. I'm on the fly trying to remember a quote that I just read the other day that it was along the lines of, you know, financial success is oftentimes avoiding catastrophic outcomes versus uh, hitting the highs. So I try to remind people it's a long term game, and you know we might be having to make some sales that don't look all that great on a per bushel profitability basis. Not going to look like it did in 22 and early 2023. But you know we've got to come back and get back to basics here. And how do we make sales? Because bottom line, there's going to whether we have a plus trend line yield this year or not, it's still a lot of corn that's got to find a home.
Right.
And while demand is good right now, we are, you know, we've seen robust exports, we've seen good ethanol demand. You know, that can go away in a hurry, like we saw in those high priced years.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you very much, Tyler, for joining us. If anyone knows how to play the long game, it's folks in agriculture, and I have confidence that we're going to see this crop home. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Pam.